Hi, today we listen to How Does Your Garden Grow by Agatha Christie. Hercule Poirot arranged his letters in a neat pile in front of him. He picked up the topmost letter, studied the address for a moment, then neatly slit the back of the envelope with a little paper knife that he kept on the breakfast table for that express purpose and extracted the contents. Inside was yet another envelope, carefully sealed with purple wax and marked, "Private and Confidential." Hercule Poirot's eyebrows rose a little on his egg-shaped head. He murmured, "Patience, new salon's arriver," and once more brought the little paper knife into play. This time the envelope yielded a letter, written in a rather shaky and spiky handwriting. Several words were heavily underlined. Hercule Poirot unfolded it and read. The letter was headed once again "Private and Confidential." On the right-hand side was the address Rosebank, Charman's Green, Bucks, and the date March 21st. Dear M. Poirot, I have been recommended to you by an old and valued friend of mine who knows the worry and distress I have been in lately. Not that this friend knows the actual circumstances. Those I have kept entirely to myself, the matter being strictly private. My friend assures me that you are discretion itself, and that there will be no fear of my being involved in a police matter which, if my suspicions should prove correct, I should very much dislike. But it is of course possible that I am entirely mistaken. I do not feel myself clear-headed enough nowadays, suffering as I do from insomnia and the result of a severe illness last winter, to investigate things for myself. I have neither the means nor the ability. On the other hand, I must reiterate once more that this is a very delicate family matter and that for many reasons I may want the whole thing hushed up. If I am once assured of the facts, I can deal with the matter myself and should prefer to do so. I hope that I have made myself clear on this point. If you will undertake this investigation, perhaps you will let me know too. The above address? Yours very truly, Amelia Barrowby. Poirot read the letter through twice. Again his eyebrows rose slightly. Then he placed it on one side and proceeded to the next envelope in the pile. At 10 o'clock precisely he entered the room where Miss Lemon, his confidential secretary, sat awaiting her instructions for the day. Miss Lemon was 48 and of unprepossessing appearance. Her general effect was that of a lot of bones flung together at random. She had a passion for order almost equaling that of Poirot himself, and though capable of thinking, she never thought unless told to do so. Poirot handed her the morning correspondence. "Have the goodness, mademoiselle, to write refusals couched in correct terms to all of these." Miss Lemon ran an eye over the various letters, scribbling in turn a hieroglyphic on each of them. These marks were legible to her alone and were in a code of her own. Soft, soap, slap in the face, purr, cut, and so on. Having done this, she nodded and looked up for further instructions. Poirot handed her Amelia Barrowby's letter. She extracted it from its double envelope, read it through and looked up inquiringly. "Yes, M. Poirot?" Her pencil hovered, ready, over her shorthand pad. "What is your opinion of that letter, Miss Lemon?" With a slight frown Miss Lemon put down the pencil and read through the letter again. The contents of a letter meant nothing to Miss Lemon except from the point of view of composing an adequate reply. Very occasionally her employer appealed to her human, as opposed to her official, capacities. It slightly annoyed Miss Lemon when he did so. She was very nearly the perfect machine, completely and gloriously uninterested in all human affairs. Her real passion in life was the perfection of a filing system beside which all other filing systems should sink into oblivion. She dreamed of such a system at night. Nevertheless, Miss Lemon was perfectly capable of intelligence on purely human matters, as Hercule Poirot well knew. "Well?" he demanded. "Old lady," said Miss Lemon, "got the wind up pretty badly." "Ah, the wind rises in her, you think?" Miss Lemon, who considered that Poirot had been long enough in Great Britain to understand its slang terms, did not reply. She took a brief look at the double envelope. "Very hush-hush," she said, "and tells you nothing at all." "Yes," said Hercule Poirot. "I observed that." Miss Lemon's hand hung once more hopefully over the shorthand pad. This time Hercule Poirot responded. "Tell her I will do myself the honor to call upon her at any time she suggests, unless she prefers to consult me here." Do not type the letter. Write it by hand. Yes, M. Poirot. Poirot produced more correspondence. These are bills. Miss Lemon's efficient hands sorted them quickly. I'll pay all but these two. Why those two? There is no error in them. They are firms you've only just begun to deal with. It looks bad to pay too promptly when you've just opened an account. Looks as though you were working up to get some credit later on. Ah, murmured Poirot. I bow to your superior knowledge of the British tradesmen. There's nothing much I don't know about them, said Miss Lemon grimly. The letter to Miss Amelia Barrowby was duly written and sent, but no reply was forthcoming. Perhaps, thought Hercule Poirot, the old lady had unraveled her mystery herself. Yet he felt a shade of surprise that in that case she should not have written a courteous word to say that his services were no longer required. It was 5 days later when Miss Lemon, after receiving her morning's instructions, said, "That Miss Barrowby we wrote to, no wonder there's been no answer. She's dead." Hercule Poirot said very softly, "Ah, dead." It sounded not so much like a question as an answer. Opening her handbag, Miss Lemon produced a newspaper cutting. I saw it in the tube and tore it out. Just registering in his mind approval of the fact that, though Miss Lemon used the word tore, she had neatly cut the entry with scissors, Poirot read the announcement taken from the births, deaths and marriages in the Morning Post. On March 26th, suddenly, at Rosebank, Charmans Green, Amelia Jane Barrowby, in her 73rd year. No flowers, by request. Poirot read it over. He murmured under his breath, "Suddenly." Then he said briskly, "If you will be so obliging as to take a letter, Miss Lemon?" The pencil hovered. Miss Lemon, her mind dwelling on the intricacies of the filing system, took down in rapid and correct shorthand. "Dear Miss Barrowby, I have received no reply from you, but as I shall be in the neighborhood of Charmans Green on Friday, I will call upon you on that day and discuss more fully the matter. Mention to me in your letter, yours, etc. Type this letter, please, and if it is posted at once, it should get to Charmans Green tonight." On the following morning, a letter in a black-edged envelope arrived by the second post. "Dear Sir, in reply to your letter, my aunt, Miss Barrowby, passed away on the 26th, so the matter you speak of is no longer of importance. Yours truly, Mary Delafontaine." Poirot smiled to himself. No longer of importance. Ah, that is what we shall see. En avant to Charmans Green. Rosebank was a house that seemed likely to live up to its name, which is more than can be said for most houses of its class and character. Hercule Poirot paused as he walked up the path to the front door and looked approvingly at the neatly planned beds on either side of him. Rose trees that promised a good harvest later in the year, and at present daffodils, early tulips, blue hyacinths. The last bed was partly edged with shells. Poirot murmured to himself, "How does it go? The English rhyme the children sing. Mistress Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow? With cockle shells and silver bells, and pretty maids all in a row. Not a row, perhaps," he considered, "but here is at least one pretty maid to make the little rhyme come right." The front door had opened and a neat little maid in cap and apron was looking somewhat dubiously at the spectacle of a heavily mustached foreign gentleman talking aloud to himself in the front garden. She was, as Poirot had noted, a very pretty little maid, with round blue eyes and rosy cheeks. Poirot raised his hat with courtesy and addressed her. "Pardon, but does a Miss Amelia Barrowby live here?" The little maid gasped and her eyes grew rounder. "Oh, sir, didn't you know? She's dead. Ever so sudden it was. Tuesday night." She hesitated, divided between two strong instincts. The first, distrust of a foreigner. The second, the pleasurable enjoyment of her class in dwelling on the subject of illness and death. "You amaze me," said Hercule Poirot, not very truthfully. "I had an appointment with the lady for today. However, I can perhaps see the other lady who lives here." The little maid seemed slightly doubtful. "The mistress? Well, you could see her, perhaps, but I don't know whether she'll be seeing anyone or not." "She will see me," said Poirot, and handed her a card. The authority of his tone had its effect. The rosy-cheeked maid fell back and ushered Poirot into a sitting room on the right of the hall. Then, card in hand, she departed to summon her mistress. Hercule Poirot looked round him. The room was a perfectly conventional drawing room, oatmeal-colored paper with a frieze round the top, indeterminate crotons, rose-colored cushions and curtains, a good many china knickknacks and ornaments. There was nothing in the room that stood out, that announced a definite personality. Suddenly Poirot, who was very sensitive, felt eyes watching him. He wheeled round. A girl was standing in the entrance of the French window, a small, sallow girl, with very black hair and suspicious eyes. She came in, and as Poirot made a little bow, she burst out abruptly, "Why have you come?" Poirot did not reply. He merely raised his eyebrows. "You are not a lawyer, no?" Her English was good, but not for a minute would anyone have taken her to be English. "Why should I be a lawyer, mademoiselle?" The girl stared at him sullenly. "I thought you might be. I thought you had come perhaps to say that she did not know what she was doing. I have heard of such things, the not due influence. That is what they call it, no? But that is not right. She wanted me to have the money, and I shall have it. If it is needful, I shall have a lawyer of my own. The money is mine. She wrote it down so, and so it shall be." She looked ugly, her chin thrust out, her eyes gleaming. The door opened and a tall woman entered and said, "Katrina!" The girl shrank, flushed, muttered something and went out through the window. Poirot turned to face the newcomer who had so effectually dealt with the situation by uttering a single word. There had been authority in her voice, and contempt and a shade of well-bred irony. He realized at once that this was the owner of the house, Mary Delafontaine. "M. Poirot? I wrote to you. You cannot have received my letter. Alas, I have been away from London." "Oh, I see. That explains it. I must introduce myself. My name is Delafontaine. This is my husband. Miss Barrowby was my aunt." Mr. Delafontaine had entered so quietly that his arrival had passed unnoticed. He was a tall man with grizzled hair and an indeterminate manner. He had a nervous way of fingering his chin. He looked often towards his wife, and it was plain that he expected her to take the lead in any conversation. "I must regret that I intrude in the midst of your bereavement," said Hercule Poirot. "I quite realize that it is not your fault," said Mrs. Delafontaine. "My aunt died on Tuesday evening. It was quite unexpected." "Most unexpected," said Mr. Delafontaine. "Great blow." His eyes watched the window where the foreign girl had disappeared. "I apologize," said Hercule Poirot, "and I withdraw." He moved a step towards the door. "Half a sec," said Mr. Delafontaine. "You had an appointment with Aunt Amelia, you say?" "Parfaitement. Perhaps you will tell us about it," said his wife. "If there is anything we can do." "It was of a private nature," said Poirot. "I am a detective," he added simply. Mr. Delafontaine knocked over a little china figure he was handling. His wife looked puzzled. "A detective? And you had an appointment with Auntie? But how extraordinary!" She stared at him. "Can't you tell us a little more, Poirot? It seems quite fantastic." Poirot was silent for a moment. He chose his words with care. "It is difficult for me, madam, to know what to do." "Look here," said Mr. Delafontaine. "She didn't mention Russians, did she?" "Russians? Yes, you know, Bolsheviks, Reds, all that sort of thing." "Don't be absurd, Henry," said his wife. Mr. Delafontaine collapsed. Sorry, I just wondered." Mary Delafontaine looked frankly at Poirot. Her eyes were very blue, the color of forget-me-nots. "If you can tell us anything, Poirot, I should be glad if you would do so. I can assure you that I have a reason for asking." Mr. Delafontaine looked alarmed. "Be careful, old girl. You know there may be nothing in it." Again his wife quelled him with a glance. "Well, Poirot?" Slowly, gravely, Hercule Poirot shook his head. He shook it with visible regret, but he shook it. "At present, madam," he said, "I fear I must say nothing." He bowed, picked up his hat and moved to the door. Mary Delafontaine came with him into the hall. On the doorstep he paused and looked at her. "You are fond of your garden, I think, madam?" "I? Yes, I spend a lot of time gardening. Je vous fais mes compliments." He bowed once more and strode down to the gate. As he passed out of it and turned to the right, he glanced back and registered 2 impressions: a sallow face watching him from the first-floor window, and a man of erect and soldierly carriage pacing up and down on the opposite side of the street. Hercule Poirot nodded to himself. "Definitivement," he said. "There is a mouse in this hole. What move must the cat make now?" His decision took him to the nearest post office. Here he put through a couple of telephone calls. The result seemed to be satisfactory. He bent his steps to Charman's Green police station, where he inquired for Inspector Sims. Inspector Sims was a big, burly man with a hearty manner. Poirot?" he inquired. "I thought so. I've just this minute had a telephone call through from the chief constable about you. He said you'd be dropping in. Come into my office." The door shut. The inspector waved Poirot to one chair, settled himself in another, and turned a gaze of acute inquiry upon his visitor. "You're very quick on to the mark, Poirot. Come to see us about this Rosebank case almost before we know it is a case. What put you on to it?" Poirot drew out the letter he had received and handed it to the inspector. The latter read it with some interest. "Interesting," he said. "The trouble is, it might mean so many things. Pity she couldn't have been a little more explicit. It would have helped us now. Or there might have been no need for help." "You mean, she might have been alive? You go as far as that, do you?" I'm not sure you're wrong. I pray of you, Inspector, recount to me the facts. I know nothing at all." "That's easily done. Old lady was taken bad after dinner on Tuesday night. Very alarming. Convulsions, spasms, whatnot. They sent for the doctor. By the time he arrived, she was dead. Idea was she'd died of a fit. Well, he didn't much like the look of things. He hemmed and hawed and put it with a bit of soft solder, but he made it clear that he couldn't give a death certificate. And as far as the family go, that's where the matter stands. They're awaiting the result of the post-mortem. We've got a bit further. The doctor gave us the tip right away. He and the police surgeon did the autopsy together, and the result is in no doubt whatever. The old lady died of a large dose of strychnine." "Aha! That's right. Very nasty bit of work. Point is, who gave it to her? It must have been administered very shortly before death. First idea was it was given to her in her food at dinner, but frankly, that seems to be a washout. They had artichoke soup, served from a tureen, fish pie and apple tart. Miss Barrowby, Mr. Delafontaine and Mrs. Delafontaine. Miss Barrowby had a kind of nurse attendant, a half-Russian girl, but she didn't eat with the family. She had the remains as they came out from the dining room. There's a maid, but it was her night out. She left the soup on the stove and the fish pie in the oven, and the apple tart was cold. All three of them ate the same thing, and, apart from that, I don't think you could get strychnine down anyone's throat that way. Stuff's as bitter as gall. The doctor told me you could taste it in a solution of 1 in 1,000 or something like that. Coffee? Coffee's more like it. But the old lady never took coffee. I see your point. Yes, it seems an insuperable difficulty. What did she drink at the meal? Water. Worse and worse. Bit of a teaser, isn't it? She had money, the old lady? Very well-to-do, I imagine. Of course, we haven't got exact details yet. The Delafontaines are pretty badly off, from what I can make out. The old lady helped with the upkeep of the house. Poirot smiled a little. He said, "So you suspect the Delafontaines? Which of them?" "I don't exactly say I suspect either of them in particular. But there it is. They're her only near relations, and her death brings them a tidy sum of money, I've no doubt. We all know what human nature is. Sometimes inhuman. Yes, that is very true. And there was nothing else the old lady ate or drank. Well, as a matter of fact, voila. I felt that you had something, as you say, up your sleeve, the soup, the fish pie, the apple tart, bêtise. Now we come to the hub of the affair. I don't know about that, but as a matter of fact, the old girl took a cachet before meals. You know, not a pill or a tablet, one of those rice paper things with a powder inside. Some perfectly harmless thing for the digestion. Admirable. Nothing is easier than to fill a cachet with strychnine and substitute it for one of the others. It slips down the throat with a drink of water and is not tasted. That's all right. The trouble is, the girl gave it to her. The Russian girl? Yes, Katrina Rieger. She was a kind of lady help, nurse companion to Miss Barrowby. Fairly ordered about by her, too, I gather. Fetch this, fetch that, fetch the other, rub my back, pour out my medicine, run round to the chemist, all that sort of business. You know how it is with these old women. They mean to be kind, but what they need is a sort of black slave. Poirot smiled. And there you are, you see, continued Inspector Sims. It doesn't fit in what you might call nicely. Why should the girl poison her? Miss Barrowby dies and now the girl will be out of a job, and jobs aren't easy to find. She's not trained or anything. Still, suggested Poirot, if the box of cachets was left about, anyone in the house might have the opportunity. Naturally, we're making inquiries, quiet like, if you understand me. When the prescription was last made up where it was usually kept. Patience and a lot of spade work, that's what will do the trick in the end. And then there's Miss Barrowby's solicitor. I'm having an interview with him tomorrow. And the bank manager. There's a lot to be done still. Poirot rose. A little favor, Inspector Sims. You will send me a little word how the affair marches. I would esteem it a great favor. Here is my telephone number. Why, certainly, M. Poirot. 2 heads are better than 1. And besides, you ought to be in on this, having had that letter and all. You are too amiable, Inspector. Politely, Poirot shook hands and took his leave. 3. He was called to the telephone on the following afternoon. Is that M. Poirot? Inspector Sims here. Things are beginning to sit up and look pretty in the little matter you and I know of. In verity? Tell me, I pray of you. Well, here's item number 1, and a pretty big item. Miss B. left a small legacy to her niece and everything else to K. In consideration of her great kindness and attention. That's the way it was put. That alters the complexion of things. A picture rose swiftly in Poirot's mind. A sullen face and a passionate voice saying, "The money is mine. She wrote it down, and so it shall be." The legacy would not come as a surprise to Katrina. She knew about it beforehand. Item number 2, continued the voice of Inspector Sims. Nobody but K. handled that cachet. You can be sure of that? The girl herself doesn't deny it. What do you think of that? Extremely interesting. We only want one thing more, evidence of how the strychnine came into her possession. That oughtn't to be difficult. But so far you haven't been successful? I've barely started. The inquest was only this morning. What happened at it? Adjourned for a week. And the young lady, Kay? I'm detaining her on suspicion. Don't want to run any risks. She might have some funny friends in the country who'd try to get her out of it. No, said Poirot. I do not think she has any friends. Really? What makes you say that, M. Poirot? It is just an idea of mine. There were no other items, as you call them, nothing that's strictly relevant. Miss B. seems to have been monkeying about a bit with her shares lately. Must have dropped quite a tidy sum. It's rather a funny business one way and another, but I don't see how it affects the main issue, not at present, that is. No, perhaps you are right. Well, my best thanks to you. It was most amiable of you to ring me up. Not at all. I'm a man of my word. I could see you were interested. Who knows, you may be able to give me a helping hand before the end. That would give me great pleasure. It might help you, for instance, if I could lay my hand on a friend of the girl Katrina. I thought you said she hadn't got any friends? Said Inspector Sims, surprised. I was wrong, said Hercule Poirot. She has one. Before the inspector could ask a further question, Poirot had rung off. With a serious face, he wandered into the room where Miss Lemon sat at her typewriter. She raised her hands from the keys at her employer's approach and looked at him inquiringly. I want you, said Poirot, to figure to yourself a little history. Miss Lemon dropped her hands into her lap in a resigned manner. She enjoyed typing, paying bills, filing papers, and entering up engagements. To be asked to imagine herself in hypothetical situations bored her very much, but she accepted it as a disagreeable part of a duty. "You are a Russian girl," began Poirot. "Yes," said Miss Lemon, looking intensely British. "You are alone and friendless in this country. You have reasons for not wishing to return to Russia. You are employed as a kind of drudge, nurse attendant and companion to an old lady. You are meek and uncomplaining." "Yes," said Miss Lemon obediently, but entirely failing to see herself being meek to any old lady under the sun. "The old lady takes a fancy to you. She decides to leave her money to you. She tells you so." Poirot paused. Miss Lemon said yes again. "And then the old lady finds out something. Perhaps it is a matter of money. She may find that you have not been honest with her. Or it might be more grave still, a medicine that tasted different, some food that disagreed. Anyway, she begins to suspect you of something and she writes to a very famous detective, enfin, to the most famous detective, me. I am to call upon her shortly. And then, as you say, the dripping will be in the fire. The great thing is to act quickly. And so, before the great detective arrives, the old lady is dead. And the money comes to you. Tell me, does that seem to you reasonable?" "Quite reasonable," said Miss Lemon. "Quite reasonable for a Russian, that is. Personally, I should never take a post as a companion. I like my duties clearly defined. And of course, I should not dream of murdering anyone." Poirot sighed. "How I miss my friend Hastings. He had such imagination, such a romantic mind. It is true that he always imagined wrong, but that in itself was a guide." Miss Lemon was silent. She looked longingly at the typewritten sheet in front of her. "So it seems to you reasonable," mused Poirot. "Doesn't it to you?" "I am almost afraid it does," sighed Poirot. The telephone rang and Miss Lemon went out of the room to answer it. She came back to say, "It's Inspector Sims again." Poirot hurried to the instrument. "Allo, allo, what is that you say?" Sims repeated his statement. "We found a packet of strychnine in the girl's bedroom, tucked underneath the mattress. The sergeant's just come in with the news. That about clinches it, I think." "Yes," said Poirot. "I think that clinches it." His voice had changed. It rang with sudden confidence. When he had rung off, he sat down at his writing table and arranged the objects on it in a mechanical manner. He murmured to himself, "There was something wrong. I felt it, no, not felt. It must have been something I saw. And avant the little gray cells. Ponder, reflect. Was everything logical and in order? The girl, her anxiety about the money. Madame de la Fontaine, her husband, his suggestion of Russians. Imbecile, but he is an imbecile. The room, the garden, yes, the garden." He sat up very stiff. The green light shone in his eyes. He sprang up and went into the adjoining room. "Miss Lemon, will you have the kindness to leave what you are doing and make an investigation for me?" "An investigation, Poirot? I'm afraid I'm not very good." Poirot interrupted her. "You said one day that you knew all about tradesmen." "Certainly I do," said Miss Lemon with confidence. "Then the matter is simple. You are to go to Charman's Green and you are to discover a fishmonger." "A fishmonger?" asked Miss Lemon, surprised. "Precisely. The fishmonger who supplied Rosebank with fish. When you have found him, you will ask him a certain question." He handed her a slip of paper. Miss Lemon took it, noted its contents without interest, then nodded and slipped the lid on her typewriter. "We will go to Charman's Green together," said Poirot. "You go to the fishmonger and I to the police station. It will take us but half an hour from Baker Street." On arrival at his destination, he was greeted by the surprised Inspector Sims. "Well, this is quick work, M. Poirot. I was talking to you on the phone only an hour ago. I have a request to make to you. That you allow me to see this girl, Katrina." "What is her name?" "Katrina Rieger." "Well, I don't suppose there's any objection to that." The girl Katrina looked even more sallow and sullen than ever. Poirot spoke to her very gently. "Mademoiselle, I want you to believe that I am not your enemy. I want you to tell me the truth." Her eyes snapped defiantly. "I have told the truth. To everyone I have told the truth. If the old lady was poisoned, it was not I who poisoned her. It is all a mistake. You wish to prevent me having the money." Her voice was rasping. She looked, he thought, like a miserable little cornered rat. Did no one handle it but you? I have said so, have I not? They were made up at the chemist's that afternoon. I brought them back with me in my bag. That was just before supper. I opened the box and gave Miss Barrowby one with a glass of water. No one touched them but you? No. A cornered rat, with courage. And Miss Barrowby had for supper only what we have been told. The soup, the fish pie, the tart. Yes. A hopeless yes. Dark, smoldering eyes that saw no light anywhere. Poirot patted her shoulder. Be of good courage, mademoiselle. There may yet be freedom, yes, and money. A life of ease. She looked at him suspiciously. As she went out, Sims said to him, I didn't quite get what you said through the telephone. Something about the girl having a friend. She has one. Me, said Hercule Poirot, and had left the police station before the inspector could pull his wits together. For at the Green Cat Tea Rooms, Miss Lemon did not keep her employer waiting. She went straight to the point. The man's name is Rudge in the High Street, and you were quite right. 12.5 exactly. I've made a note of what he said. She handed it to him. R. It was a deep, rich sound like a purr of a cat. Hercule Poirot betook himself to Rosebank. As he stood in the front garden, the sun setting behind him, Mary Delafontaine came out to him. Poirot? Her voice sounded surprised. You have come back? Yes, I have come back. He paused and then said, When I first came here, madam, the children's nursery rhyme came into my head. Mistress Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow? With cockle shells and silver bells and pretty maids all in a row. Only they are not cockle shells, are they, madam? They are oyster shells. His hand pointed. He heard her catch her breath and then stay very still. Her eyes asked, A question. He nodded. I know. The maid left the dinner ready. She will swear and Katrina will swear that that is all you had. Only you and your husband know that you brought back 12.5 oysters. A little treat pour la bonne tante. So easy to put the strychnine in an oyster. It is swallowed. Come see, but there remain the shells, they must not go in the bucket. The maid would see them, and so you thought of making an edging of them to a bed. But there were not enough, the edging is not complete. The effect is bad. It spoils the symmetry of the otherwise charming garden. Those few oyster shells struck an alien note. They displeased my eye on my first visit. Mary Delafontaine said, I suppose you guessed from the letter. I knew she had written, but I didn't know how much she'd said. Poirot answered evasively, I knew at least that it was a family matter. If it had been a question of Katrina, there would have been no point in hushing things up. I understand that you or your husband handled Miss Barrowby's securities to your own profit, and that she found out. Mary Delafontaine nodded. We've done it for years. A little here and there. I never realized she was sharp enough to find out. And then I learned she had sent for a detective. And I found out, too, that she was leaving her money to Katrina, that miserable little creature. And so the strychnine was put in Katrina's bedroom? I comprehend. You save yourself and your husband from what I may discover. And you saddle an innocent child with murder. Had you no pity, madam? Mary Delafontaine shrugged her shoulders. Her blue forget-me-not eyes looked into Poirot's. He remembered the perfection of her acting the first day he had come and the bungling attempts of her husband. A woman above the average, but inhuman. She said, Pity? For that miserable, intriguing little rat. Her contempt rang out. Hercule Poirot said slowly, I think, madam, that you have cared in your life for two things only. One is your husband. He saw her lips tremble. And the other is your garden. He looked round him. His glance seemed to apologize to the flowers for that which he had done and was about to do. Please subscribe, like this video for more great audiobook stories, and check my channel.